All right. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate you taking the time to visit us here virtually. My name is Sarah Belanger. I'm an Assistant Director of Admission here at UMass, and I'm here with my financial aid colleague, Kale, and I also have a colleague who's helping us out in the background, Rachel, so you might be able to see her screen there, but she's helping us out with the chat today, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This session today is our spotlight on financing your education at UMass. So again, we're happy to have you, and the format is we're going to do some Q&A. We have some very frequently asked questions for the financial aid office. So I'm going to start. Let's have Kale introduce himself and give us a general intro, and then I'll start with some of our questions.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. My name is Kale, and I'm the Assistant Director of Financial Aid Services. And today I brought a few questions that come up pretty frequently, so hopefully it can be an informative session that people are able to look at and get educated on.
Great. Thanks, Kale. So the first question is, what do you think the most important thing that a student needs to complete to get financial aid?
Yeah, so I always say that the most and the first thing that students should focus on is FAFSA. So no matter what college or university that you're going to, you need to complete the FAFSA in order to receive any kind of financial aid. There are certain awards that you can still receive without completing the FAFSA, but in most cases it's a required step that I always encourage that people complete the FAFSA.
Great. And where do they get that?
Yep, so you can actually just go to any kind of search engine and then just type in FAFSA. And then it's going to be the first thing that pops up. You just click on it and you're going to log in with your normal credentials, and you'll be able to get in through there and you can complete the whole thing.
Great. So when can students start their FAFSA?
Yep, so the FAFSA becomes available every year in October. It's actually October 1st. So if you're a go-getter, right when it becomes available, you can definitely complete it there. If you're like me and you want to take your time a little bit, then you can wait until December or so when you have a little more time, hopefully, and then you can get it done at that point.
Nice. And can you tell us a little bit about how college costs work?
Yeah, so let me go ahead and do a quick share screen so I can pull up the document that I have ready here. Excellent. So the way I like to think about college costs and paying for college, my favorite metaphor is that it's like a glass of water. So you start with your cost of attendance. So your cost of attendance is on here on the left. So it's starting at $30,000. That includes absolutely everything that you can think of. So that's going to be your dorm. It's going to be the food that you're going to have to pay. It could be fees. So it's just everything bundled up together. And it's going to be right there. And you can think of it as, the form of liquid or something like that. So where it gets interesting is in the middle slide where you're able to deduct the financial aid that you receive. So in this example, you're getting $20,000, and of that, some of it might be federal student loans, some of that might be grants, and some of that might be scholarships. So I guess in this metaphor, you could think of it as some kind of like chemical, compound or magic powder that's able to take the liquid away. So then what's resulted from that is that you're going to have a difference of the two. So it's basically 30,000 from the left minus 20,000, which is the financial aid that you have, and that's going to bring you with a balance of about 10,000. So it's a pretty complex thing when you look at all these different universities, financial aid packages. But I think this is at the core and this is at the bottom line. And if you think of it like this, it'll get a little bit easier. So if you do have $10,000 at a place like UMass, it's 2 semesters. So it's going to be $5,000 per semester. So that's another important piece to think about as well. And I think that's it for that.
That's great. I love that graphic. And I see in that the middle cup there had loans, grants, and scholarship. Can you talk a little bit, I assume that includes federal loans, and can you talk a little bit about how federal loans work?
Yeah, absolutely. So for federal loans as an undergraduate, you're going to have access to the federal subsidized and then the unsubsidized loans. So if you're comparing the two, you could look at the subsidized loan being a little bit better. So the subsidized loan, the interest doesn't accumulate while you're in school, which is phenomenal. That's great. And unsubsidized loans, the interest does accumulate while you're in school. They're both good loans because they're through the federal government. They are still debt though, so that's something important to keep in mind if you're trying to avoid debt and student loans. You do have the ability to cancel those, so you could do that. And some things to keep in mind is that you can get $5,500 as a freshman, and then it's going to be $6,500 as a sophomore, and then junior it's going to be $7,500, senior it's going to be $7,500 also.
Great. And usually for loans, if a student says, "Gee, I don't want any loan debt," what do you suggest, and how do you kind of counsel them in that scenario?
Yeah, so at UMass Amherst, you would just let us know. You can send us an email or you could give us a phone call and say, hey, you know, it looks like I'm going to be taking $5,500 in unsubsidized loans and I don't want these. Can I cancel it? And we can go ahead and do that for you. Or you can actually log into your Spire account and you can actually just manually click and hit the button that says cancel, which is pretty straightforward. So you can do it or you can just ask us to do it. We can complete that for you.
Perfect, nice. And when a student is talking about their financial aid situation to you or a parent, is there something that they need to prove that they are themselves, or like what do they have to do for that if they were to call you and want to talk about their financial aid?
Yep, so there's certain things that we will confirm. So we might ask for like their date of birth information, but also once a student is in college, then when we talk to the parents of that student, we do need to go through FERPA, which is a federal act. So what a student can do is they can assign a parent a FERPA access code. So for example, a student could basically give a parent a code like 1234. So when the parent calls in and they're asking us questions, we would just ask for, you know, the FERPA code. We would say, do you have to know what your FERPA code is? And the parent would say it's 1234. And then that's pretty much it. And we can talk about the account specifics.
Great, that's awesome. Seems pretty easy. So what about scholarships? You know, I know there's some misconceptions about scholarships and some rumors. So can you talk a little bit about how a student gets a scholarship and what that might mean?
Yeah, so when I think about scholarships, I always, if you haven't noticed, I like to simplify information as much as possible. So when I look at scholarships, I always start with the smallest and then you gradually expand from there. What I mean by that is if you're looking for a scholarship, reach out to your high school guidance counselor, reach out to your employer, reach out to any local organizations that you might be part of. Because the benefit of starting with a smaller pool is that you're going to have less competition. So you're going to have a higher chance of being successful and being able to get that scholarship. So that's something that I always say. And then, you know, once you keep expanding, you might be able to look at national scholarships and things like that. But I always recommend looking local and trying to get those scholarships first. And then once you are at UMass Amherst, you're going to have access to a database called Academic Works, which is an excellent resource where you can basically put one application in and it's going to notify you, or it's going to give you a list of certain scholarships that you might qualify for. So it streamlines the process and it makes it very easy for the student to apply for scholarships. So I definitely encourage that as well.
Great, yeah. I just had one of the students that works for me asked me for a recommendation for a scholarship that he applied for through that system. So I know it's definitely working. So that's
yeah, it's a great resource. And when I look at students' accounts, I can't tell you how many times I've seen scholarships that have come through Academic Works. And also, what I see a lot is when students work at you know, places like Big Y, for example. When I'm looking at the account, I'll see a lot of Big Y scholarships, for example. So it's definitely worth asking your employer if they have any scholarships.
And is there a difference? So if a student gets like a $50 scholarship from their local booster club, do they have to report that to UMass, or is it just larger scholarships that might be, you know, $1,000 or $2,000? When do they have to report, and how do they do that?
Yeah, so there isn't really a process of us kind of looking through each student to say, you know, did you get a scholarship? Did you get a scholarship? It's more along the lines of, if there was a scholarship, was it in your name, like the student's name, or is it addressed to UMass Amherst? So if it's addressed through UMass Amherst, for that money to come through, you do have to give the check to UMass Amherst, to the bursar's office. and then they're able to disperse those funds, and then you would be able to eventually apply that to the bill, or if there's any kind of excess, you'd be able to get a refund, and you could use that refund to buy textbooks, or you could apply it towards rent, things like that. So if you do get any scholarships, you can just send it in directly to the bursar's office.
Great. So let's switch gears back to talking about loans. And what about private loans? And do you have advice about that, or what can you tell students kind of how to navigate private loans?
Yeah, so because we're a public institution, we can't really make certain recommendations, comparing company A to company B. But what I can say from my experience is to definitely do the research when it comes to private loans. And I always recommend that students go for a fixed interest rate as opposed to a variable interest rate. So a fixed interest rate, I like the language that they use for this because it's super straightforward. So if it's a fixed interest rate, if you get a 2% interest rate, that means that it's going to stay at 2% for the entire life of the loan, which is excellent. If you have a variable interest rate, you might get a better rate. You might get something 1.5. I've never seen a 1.5 interest rate, but that'd be amazing. So if you get a 1.5 interest rate in 5 to 10 years, that might turn into like 15% or something scary like that, 8%. So if you're taking out $10,000, that's a pretty big deal. So that's something that I always make sure I talk about when I talk to students that are thinking about taking out private loans or alternative loans, which are the same thing. And I also recommend that you can defer those loans. So deferment is when you don't have to make payments while the student is in school. Most lenders do this, but some might not. So it's something to keep an eye open for. So making sure that it's a fixed interest rate, that's step one. And step two is making sure that it allows for deferment.
And is that the kind of loan that they can look for organizations online or go into their local bank? How does a student do that?
Yeah, so you can definitely go to your local bank. You can go to like a credit union and you could, ask like, I'm interested in taking a student loan. Do you have that here? Or you could go to our website, for example, and you can access like an alternative loan list where it's basically going to list all the different private lenders out there with different interest rates, what kind of loans that they can offer. We don't say that one lender, is better than the other, and it's all in random order. But it's definitely a resource that you can use to get educated.
Great. And I know I had this question this morning in a high school visit, so I know it's a pretty popular question about study abroad. And it's often, can I get financial aid, and how does it work when I study abroad at UMass? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so whenever a student has questions about study abroad, I do ask that they consult with the study abroad program specifically because there are different kinds of study abroad programs and organizations out there. And the reason I say this is because your financial aid can also change a little bit, or the way that you make the payment can also change and fluctuate a little bit based on what kind of an organization that you're going through. Sometimes it might be UMass partnership organizations, others might not be. So there's certain factors like that that could change a few variables. So I do recommend that the student reaches out to us, but also consulting with the study abroad program. But in terms of financial aid, you're able to still gain access to most of the funds.
Great, that's perfect. And what about the eager student who lands a fabulous job after college or has a generous benefactor potentially? Can they pay their student loans back early?
Yeah, absolutely. So at any point, let's say you're a freshman right now and you don't like student loans. I don't think any of us do. So what you can do is you can actually just go to studentaid.gov. It's a federal website, and then you just log in with your Fafsa information, and you're going to be able to see what loans that you've taken out, what the interest rate is, and what is like the repayment term and who's going to be managing that debt. So you're able to get all that information. You can go ahead and start making payments there. And the benefits of making payments, especially on an unsubsidized loan, is pretty great, especially because the unsubsidized loan, the interest will accumulate while you're in school.
Okay, good to know. And so we get asked a lot when we're out on the road, when we can be out on the road, visiting high schools and going to college fairs, uh, about unique situations. So there's, as we all know, lots of different families and family dynamics and split households and whatnot. And what does a student do if they have a unique situation or you know, a split household or some sort of just any kind of situation that they feel like needs clarification or they need help with? What do they do?
Yeah, so we do have different types of appeals for different circumstances that a student might be in. So, for example, this is a pretty common appeal, especially right now with COVID, where the parents or the single parent may have lost their job due to COVID, and their income may have dropped significantly. So when we're looking at the FAFSA, we usually look at 2000 and, sorry, I'll go back. We're going to look at the prior financial information. So for 2020, we're going to be looking at 2018 financial information. This is where a lot of people get tripped up and it's very confusing, but the way I'd like to think of it is it's always the prior year. So let's say in this example that in 2018, a family made, let's say $70,000 or so. And then in 2020, due to COVID, there's a loss in employment. So then income actually dropped down to, let's say, $35,000 because it's still going to count the portion of income that you've earned for 2020. So in that circumstance, you can let us know and you can do what's called a special circumstance appeal. And then in the appeal, you're going to basically prove your case or make the case, and a appeal committee is going to look over that information. And then if the appeal is approved, there is the potential that the student qualifies for more need-based aid, for example. I do want to note that this works for certain circumstances and maybe not others. You know, for example, let's say that a family income went from $200,000 a year to $150,000 a year. So in that circumstance, you might not actually see any kind of increase in aid, and that's why we suggest that you give us a phone call so we can, you know, run some numbers, do some calculations, and do a simulation, and then let you know if it might be worth doing an appeal based on the circumstance that you described. So I think the most important takeaway from this is talk to us and let us know, and we can see if we can help you.
Well, that was my next question, is what do students do if they're in this process and it's the fall and they're maybe having trouble with their FAFSA or they just don't know kind of what to do? What do they do? How do they contact you? What kind of resources are out there for them?
Yeah, definitely. So I think if you want to just get all the information, you can just go to a search engine and type in UMass Amherst Financial Aid. And the first thing that's going to pop up right there is going to be a great resource where you can get all the information. In terms of our email, we have finaid@finaid.umass.edu. That's our email address. And for our phone number, we have 413-545-0801. I'm glad I still remember it. So that's our contact information, so you can reach out to us at any point, and then we're going to be happy to assist you. Depending on how busy our office is, the response time might fluctuate, but we're going to do our best to get back to you.
And what do you think your busiest times are? So when people email April 1st, that could potentially be busier than, let's say, October 1st? Is that fair?
Yeah, so there's definitely certain timelines. I think whenever there's a change in events, right? So if a university makes an announcement, or if there's, you know, the FAFSA deadline, or if there's any kind of event and information that gets to people, then that's when we usually kind of get a wave of questions that come up. And we do expect this, so we do have the staffing, and we try to work at it at the most efficient abilities.
So being patient, I think, is a good reminder, because you do get an awful lot of emails. And I always like to remind people, we're in admissions, we're dealing with just one class coming in. In the student financial services, you're dealing with all 4 classes. So you're dealing with the entire financial aid population at UMass. So
I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, absolutely.
It's good to keep in mind for that kind of stuff. Is there anything, Kale, that we didn't touch upon that you want to just finish up with as kind of a tip or trick or anything? Because I think we've hit all the questions, and we've taken all the questions from the chat. I can see I asked a couple of extra questions in there that came in through the chat.
Yeah, I think those were all the main topics in the frequently asked questions. But if people do have additional questions, reach out to us, because if you reach out to us, we're going to be able to help you. And you know, if you're filling out the FAFSA, or if you just have any kind of general financial aid question, you know, call us because we're happy to help. So yeah, I think that's really it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing that great information. Thank you all for coming and for spending the time with us. I encourage you to check out our other virtual events. We've got lots going on here at UMass virtually. We'd love to connect with you. We want to stay in touch. So please check out our website for happenings. We have other spotlight series coming up. We've got some on academic programs. We've got some on Res Life and some other fun things. So keep an eye out for those. And thank you again for coming. And thanks, Kale. So we're going to sign it off today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.